Hi-ho! And welcome to the Double Click. I am your host, Marek Mandaubot. Let's get to work. Today is a very special episode, and with me I have a guest. Please welcome Marek. Marek, why don't you introduce yourself?
Of course. My name, by the way, fun intro.
Thank you.
Hi-ho, everybody. My name is pronounced Marek.
Marek.
You almost have it. It's Marek.
Yes, of course. Now, where does that name come from?
The name comes from Poland, where I was born.
No kidding. My grandmother is from Poland.
Oh, look at that. Small world.
Indeed. Now, I understand that you have a creative background.
Yes. Well, if you can call it that. I mean, it's not very glamorous.
Oh, don't be modest now.
Well, I got my Bachelor of Arts a million years ago. And then I did a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I did some photography for a few years.
Oh, is that right? What kind?
Yeah, weddings and, portraits and things like that. Then I did a little bit of music. You are talking to an amateur music artist.
Hello.
Yes.
Would I know any of your songs?
Well, it's a little niche.
For people in Beaverton, Mitch?
Yeah, exactly. Don't knock Beaverton. That's home of Nike right there.
Right. A great American company.
But yeah, I doubt you would have heard it. But maybe I'll send you some stuff. See what you think.
I'll look forward to it. Yep.
Okay. So what about you? What's your background?
Well, okay. I come from an academic background. I studied biology.
Oh, wow.
And then I moved into computer software.
Oh, that's a switch.
Well, I realized I enjoyed that day-to-day way more, especially product.
Yes.
I love combining the technology and the business sides.
Yes.
Figuring out the different risks and
my
the
favorite part
usability
too,
risks and the viability risks as Marty Kagan breaks them down as 4 risks. Maybe we'll get into all that later. But yeah, it's been great. And after 10 years or so, I'm trying my hand at entrepreneurship, and so here we are.
Congratulations! This is really great what you're doing.
Thank you. Okay. As this is the first episode, it's probably a good idea for me to break down the format. One thing I'd like to discuss and focus on this pod is a little bit of loco and tech business. And by loco, I mean Orange County. So I live and work in Southern California, Orange County specifically. And it's been a challenge to find, especially in pond form, news of Orange County that's relevant and reasonably timely. It's usually all about either Silicon Valley or Mackinac, and every now and then you hear some local LA news, especially if you listen to NPR. But it'll be nice to sort of get a podcast format local news. So we'll start with that, and then we'll get a little bit more into the broader state and maybe regional, state, and national and international news. That said, I want to stay away from politics. And it's not that it's not relevant or even important and many times urgent. It's that I'd like to, 1, not lose half the audience immediately, but 2, really elevate the discussion to first principles and things that are of, I would put this, things that are driving the concerns that most people have: the economy, personal finances, technological direction, potential dangers, the regulatory environment, but not so much sort of the mudslinging or any of that nonsense that's been basically dominating the news cycles otherwise, if that makes sense.
Of course. And, I applaud that effort. Good luck. Godspeed. It's probably going to be a challenge, but I think if anyone can do it, you can.
Thank you, and we will let history be the judge. More after a brief word from our sponsor.
Pick up something great at pickupclub.com. That's PIC without the K. Pickup Club. Pick up something great.
So I listen to a lot of podcasts, perhaps too many, and there's always a moment where someone says something and I just want to go back and say, but wait a minute, there's way more that can be said here. And in fact, oftentimes I have a very strong opinion to the counter. So I'd love to go deeper into that in this podcast.
Ah, okay. Not a bad way to productize.
Yes.
A very common occurrence.
Yes.
Very nice, very nice.
The hope is at least twofold. One is that some of these podcasts a lot of people listen to, and so maybe we can engage with our audience who might have the same thoughts and concerns, and really move the conversation forward. Two, there are, I feel, a lot of common sense solutions that, for one reason or another, are not discussed in these podcasts. Maybe it's time, maybe it's format constraints, or just the conversation goes in a different direction. But I find oftentimes the solutions, or at least potential approaches, hypotheses you might call them, don't get explored enough. And I find myself shaking my fist and screaming metaphorically at the, and sometimes literally, at the podcast, at my phone. And I would love to dive deeper into these topics here.
Well, you won't get any arguments from me there.
Very good. With that, let's get to the news. This being Orange County, let us start with real estate. Related California, a real estate developer based in Irvine, will be moving forward with a $3 billion redevelopment of Metrotown Square in Santa Ana. For reference, this is very close to South Coast Plaza. It is the largest shopping center on the west coast of the United States, according to Wikipedia. And I bring that up is because it's quite a heavy hitter in sales. It's reported that pre-COVID sales were over $1.5 billion annually, and its 275 retailers had the second highest sales volume in California at $800 per square foot. That's just under $809 recorded in San Jose, Santa Clara, the Western Valley Fair.
Wow, $800 per square foot. That's some big numbers.
Indeed, and the national average is $411 per square foot.
Still, though, that's double. And is that just a rent or is that sales?
Well, it says sales, but it would be interesting to understand the comparables here. Now, the related Bristol development, as it is known, is going to have about 350 square feet of commercial space. So maybe it will take advantage of the foot traffic at the neighboring massive mall. Also 13 acres of open space, 250-room hotel, and it's supposed to have a living space as well with thousands of housing units. So it's a mixed-use project.
Real estate is kind of fascinating. On the one hand, there's so much land all the way around in Southern California and in Orange County, but it is not zoned for development. A lot of it is set aside as nature preserves. And also the type of real estate is important, right? So this is prime real estate. $3 billion, it's a big investment, but it's looking like it has a good chance of paying off given how limited developable, if I can use that word, real estate in Orange County is. So just thinking through this real time, that kind of makes sense. And we'll see if it pays off.
Indeed. That said, it will take us some years to see if it does pay off. Development is slated to start in 2026, with the final phase completing around 2036.
Oh, wow, that long, huh?
Yes, and you may expect delays with any project of that length. However, the usage will begin sooner after the completion of the various phases throughout the project.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they'll probably learn as they go and maybe even adjust plans, a la lean product methodology. Although I don't know if real estate does that quite as well as, tech and software. But you'd think, with budgets that huge, they would to some extent at least measure foot traffic and adjust accordingly.
One would hope. A few towns over, there is a hot bidding war going on for the Ziggurat building in Laguna, Niguel, formerly called the Chet Holofield Federal Building. It was built between 68 and 71 for North American Aviation and Rockwell International, both since defunct. The initial closing date of the auction was supposed to be end of July. However, it has a soft auction feature, which means that it stays open for another short period of time after the last bid. This bid up the auction from around $130 million to $177 million final price at the end of October.
Wow.
I think we can say wow to that, yes. Also, this includes the land around the building, totaling 89 acres. That's more than twice as big as the Bristol related property. So this is a pretty hot piece of real estate in Orange County. Now imagine if we did the same in residential real estate.
Well, we do it in distressed assets, and that serves the purpose of a quicker sale. But with the soft closing, yeah, it might just exacerbate real estate prices. So don't give them any ideas, speaking from a consumer perspective. But on the flip side, it might just normalize because there is a time horizon with an auction. So there's not a sort of an artificial lengthening of the sale time, and that might just cause the prices to drop. So who knows? By the way, why is it called Ziggurat?
Apparently because it has this pyramid silhouette. It is reminiscent of ancient Mesopotamian temples.
Interesting design influence. Do we know who designed it?
Yes, well, it was famous designer William Pereira. He has signatures all over the state, in fact. Just in Southern California, he has designed things like the UC Irvine campus.
Okay.
One of the campuses in Los Angeles, I believe it was actually two. It's Pepperdine University, which Princeton Review has described as the most beautiful, or maybe the most beautiful campus in America.
Malibu.
Yes,
Beautiful.
it is a nice looking campus. And USC in LA. Also, to his name, he has things like the Trans America building in San Francisco. So his fingerprints are all over, and oftentimes, as you have observed with the Trans America pyramid, he does have these pyramid themes and motifs. So there we have it.
Growing older, I have become more appreciative of history and just understanding, knowing, remembering various facts. And sometimes, you go through life driving down the street, going to the store, and you don't realize that in this case, Pereira Drive cuts right through UCI. And goes by some of the most famous landmarks kind of on the northeastern part of the campus. The Student Center, I think it starts with, and goes past the Barclay Theater, and then it sort of cuts through the business and law schools. Yeah.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting. There's a through line here.
A theme of this podcast, no doubt. And these transactions are exemplifying increased overall activity in Orange County. Q3 2024, a report came out indicating that there was a record 1.9 million square feet of leasing, office leasing activity, reflecting a 30% increase from the previous quarter and a 2.3 increase compared to a year ago. So quarter on quarter its growth, I would consider it flat year over year, but a slight uptick.
And what's driving these transactions and quarter over quarter growth?
Well, the report outlines the top transactions being Google, JP Morgan Chase, Pepperdine University expansion. A lot of this is in the airport area, so asterisk there. But, Wells Fargo, most of them are renewals. So of the top transactions, let's call that 650,000 square feet. About 70,000 are new locations. The rest are renewals. So that's what, 10-ish% or so. The new locations are St. Joseph Health, and there's a relocation as well, Moss Adams, and another new location, APN Software Services. So just based on that, it might seem like most of this isn't driven by large transactions. It may actually be driven by sort of a large number of smaller transactions, smaller real estate stores and things, which would be good for the broader economy. Would you agree?
Yeah, it would suggest healthy business growth. And now I'm just trying to follow your math here. So you said if there's a 30% increase quarter over quarter, but only a 10% increase for the large transactions. So yeah, that would mean those smaller transactions, maybe mid and small, comprise a much larger portion of that to get to the average of 30%. So yeah, no, that would be really good for the broader economy. Now, what that doesn't square with is some experience. So living in Santa Ana, I mean, this has been happening for a decade, but just looking left, looking right, lease, for sale, for lease, for sale, all over the place. Commercial real estate driving off 17th and neighborhoods. But, to be fair, I have seen more and more high traffic restaurants buying up land and putting up, a Cane's Chicken, In-N-Out, Chick-fil-A, Wahoo's. So, I don't know if mom and pops can fare well with such large real estate prices, but maybe franchises are doing pretty well.
That's a very good point. Are you sure you don't have an analytics background?
I've been found out.
I thought so. While we're on the topic, what do you make of the residential market?
I have strong feelings about it. I don't know if this is the right medium.
Let her rip.
Well, okay, but I at least want to be measured in my response and bring some facts into this discussion.
A welcome basis for meaningful discourse.
Okay, so a lot of people talk about the rising cost of real estate and how out of hand it's getting. So I wanted to put some kind of measure to the pain we're all feeling, and I've come across the Legislative Analyst's Office website. That's the California Legislature's Nonpartisan Fiscal and Policy Advisor. That's the title on the website. And they have some really interesting stats there.
Such as?
Well, for one, the cost to buy a home, the median income needed to buy a mid-tier California home in June of 2024 was about $239,000. That's over 2 times the median California household income in 2022. It was just over 95,000.
Yes, California has had it particularly rough.
Right, and the rest of the country is not far behind. A lot of people who moved from California to avoid the high costs in California have created high costs in other regions inadvertently, like Texas, Colorado, and even other parts of the country. Anecdotally, a lot of residents from those states resented Californians for raising the prices in their housing markets, where they were getting priced out because the job prospects are not the same necessarily as those higher paying, potentially tech jobs, especially at the time when work was remote. Now, some of those have corrected, but interestingly, some local business folks, for example, in Oklahoma, there was a gentleman who went by he was colloquially called Daddy Kaiser.
Yes, I've
But
heard of them.
he funded an initiative to bring business to the local region. So to the point where they were, his organization was paying, I think, $10,000 for relocation costs.
Right.
Hmm. And creating moving assistance and kind of this ready-made community.
A chance at the American dream, perhaps?
Yeah, and it was kind of a positive for the region, but that didn't stop, of course, the local residents for feeling a certain way, right? Uh, when people were getting assistance to move there, and here they are struggling just like the rest of the country. So it's definitely a double-edged sword, but that's a whole different podcast. Back to the statistics, a couple more things stood out. One is that the monthly housing payments for the mortgage just ballooned since 2020 to 2024. Around between 2020 and 2021, it was sort of net negative, and then by 2022, it went up 20%. By the following year, it was up to 70, and in 2024, it's flirting between 80 and 90% increase. Interestingly, it was disproportionately higher in Southern California than Northern California, but both were pretty high.
That tracks. And it would be interesting to know how much this is affected by both tech workers moving out of the Bay Area and tech layoffs in recent months and years.
Quite a bit, I bet. Now, rent payments weren't well, I don't want to say weren't far behind, but they were also problematic from the perspective of just massive cumulative growth. From 2020 to 2024, looks like the increase was over 20%. It was about 25%. And again, disproportionately affecting Southern California. So if you just looked at the Bay Area, it was about 20%, and so was Los Angeles, just under 21%. But if you look at the surrounding counties, Ventura County, 33, Orange County, 34.5, San Bernardino, 41, Riverside, 43, San Diego, 37. So all these costs spilled outside of those two tech hubs, people looking for more favorable living conditions and cheaper cost of living.
This has really brought the M list out of you, hasn't it?
Well, when something like this affects you so much, I just want to know what's really going on here.
I do. So, what is really going on here?
Well, to me, it's pretty simple, but the solution would not be nearly as simple.
Say more.
Well, many people have heard that supply is what's driving the prices up, housing supply. We're short houses. We are currently short in the neighborhood of 4.5 million homes. Now, that's a bigger number than I even realized. And it's increased from 2021 to 2022, where the shortage grew from 4.3 million to 4.5 million homes. This is according to a Zillow publication in June of 2024. Now, the number of homes that were built in 2022 was 1.4 million, which sounds like a lot until you realize 1.8 million U.S. families were formed in that time. So we're falling behind. The pandemic spurred a housing boom that has been kind of a giant thud in the greater scheme of things.
So, is that your assessment of the problem that's ahead of us? Not enough housing being built? How could we increase that?
Yes and no. I think even though we say we want to build more houses, we don't really want to build more houses.
Well, it certainly feels that way, but why do you think so?
Some blame permitting and bureaucracy for being too slow and not being able to meet the challenge. But what if it is meeting the challenge? Meaning, there's a lot riding on the housing prices staying where they are and increasing. If you follow the incentives and you follow the money, who's got
to gain from increasing housing prices, and that's state government, right? They make revenue from property taxes. Also, anyone retiring, they have a certain part of their retirement portfolio. If they have pensions or 401ks or any basket of stocks, indexes, a meaningful portion of that is real estate. We've tried to build a whole ton of real estate, and that was in 2000, 6, 7, 8, and what happened there was the Great Recession. So if we build too much housing, we know that the price drops. It's supply and demand. So to avoid that, I think the forces that be, whether through inaction or through design, are keeping prices high. And I don't know what the solution to that is, because if your incentives are aligned against your stated goal, then no matter how much you work toward it, how many speaking points you have, if you don't change the underlying incentive structure, then I don't see how that goal gets achieved.
We will be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
In times when product hype does not live up to expectations, Pickup Club is there to provide wholesome value. Pickupclub.com without the K. Pick up something great.
Lots more to be said here,
Agreed.
but we have to move on for now. In related news, Costa Mesa-based Meridian Link, supplier of Encompass loan origination software, had announced the sale of 6 million shares by funds managed by the private equity firm Thoma Bravo LP, which is the majority owner of Meridian Link. The sale was reported to be executed at $21.05, netting $126 million for Thoma Bravo, but also effectively reduced the market cap of Meridian Link by over $200 million, wiping away almost $100 million of value from the company and its shareholders in the days following.
Isn't that amazing? One of the things that's very interesting to me is the difference between value created and value extracted. When I was younger, I thought the correlation was larger, quite frankly, between the two. But more recently, I realized that it's surprisingly low.
Indeed. This topic by itself could be its own show. I may want to do an episode just on this. Let me know if you would be interested in joining the conversation.
I would like that.
Okay, good. In other Orange County tech news, Blizzard Entertainment, whose parent company Activision, owned by Microsoft, announced 140 layoffs, including engineers, game designers, and artists, plus 253 more in LA County.
This hits a bit close to home. A former colleague I'm fond of used to work there.
Was your colleague affected by this layoff?
No, I think she left before that. This could just be a traditional move to increase efficiency after the merger, but I also suspect Microsoft will increasingly look to AI for efficiency of each of its existing and future employees, including engineers. Google CEO Sundar Pichai recently said that Google now generates 25% of its code using AI. Microsoft is likely in the ballpark, may even be more now.
Not an unreasonable assumption.
I have to acknowledge the not unlikely possibility.
And I see what you did there.
We are in sync.
But I think we'll see this more and more. The common talking point now is AI won't replace your job, but someone with AI will, right?
Right.
I think that's somewhat semantic, meaning the net effect will be the same. So I think it's really both.
Do you really?
Okay, so even in my work, I'm engaging fewer people because I can do more on my own before I have to reach out to someone else, for better or worse, right? So maybe that means fewer teams form or smaller teams form, but that can also mean companies don't need as many people to get the same amount of things done.
This is true, but don't you think new kinds of jobs will also emerge?
Yes, they will, but AI is also a different kind of technology. It's not just a tool, and a lot of smart people are working on AI agents now, which can get things done based on the general goal without a lot of input from a human. So what does that look like in the not-too-distant future?
If it's truly different categorically from previous technological revolutions, we don't know what that looks like yet.
Right.
So it's possible we are lulled into a false sense of security because previous technological revolutions created jobs and prosperity for a wide range of communities, right? While being naturally deflationary. But some communities have been forgotten. The American Rust Belt, for example.
That's an interesting perspective. So you're saying we already have some examples of what it looks like to be cut off from the mainstream economy.
I mean, is it really so hard to believe? Participating in the emerging AI powered economy, which eventually is likely to be just about everything, may be looking to become increasingly challenging in the not too distant future, unless someone owns the intellectual property or a sufficiently large slice of the economy, of the company, meaning, or owns enough fundamental resources to sustain themselves, like a farm or something to that effect. It would be tough to earn a living in that kind of future, potentially.
It's certainly a sobering point. How large a population could what you're describing realistically affect?
Well, only a small percentage of the population owns either key AI intellectual property or some other means of sustaining themselves off the grid. More than three-quarters of the US is in the service economy. And young people just starting out own even less. So if they don't have enough sufficient on ramps into the economy at scale, they will struggle more than previous generations. It's not the job of a company to hand out jobs, it's the job of a company to generate net positive revenue. Up to now, the corporate world needed bodies to generate that revenue. But what if they didn't need nearly as many? I really hope I'm not describing a return to a kind of feudalism or worse. But it's worth considering, you know, these kinds of possibilities as being more likely than just the remotest of chances.
More after this.
In times when product hype does not live up to expectations, Pickup Club is there to provide wholesome value. Pickupclub.com without the K. Pick up something great. I'm being a contrarian.
I was going to say.
Because of all the AI optimism out there. And in the short term, I'm very optimistic myself.
You are.
Yes, I'm possibly painting too gloomy a picture because unprecedented opportunities are also arising, this podcast being one. But it's worth calling out before we move on.
Certainly. And good call out regarding this podcast. Let's move on. An Irvine, California police department is the first to buy a Tesla truck, but you likely won't see it in a pursuit on the 5. Rather, it will likely be used at promotional or educational events in the community and at schools for things like the BEAR anti-drug program.
I remember those programs. By the way, I saw the video the Irvine PD put out with the Cybertruck driving and flashing its lights at night. Looked pretty cool.
It did.
I wonder what it cost with the police package and all.
NBC News mentioned it was $153,000, but that a Ford Police Interceptor cost $116,000 with an expected life of 3 to 4 years, whereas the Cybertruck is expected to be used for 10 years.
Not too bad. Makes sense. Fewer oil changes too.
Indeed. In other Orange County automotive headlines, Irvine-based publicly traded Rivian Automotive is in the news, but it's not all good. On the positive side, Rivian had released its spooky software update allowing owners to choose internal and external lighting in the style of Knight Rider Kit, Back to the Future Time Machine, and Trunk or Treat Haunted Spotlight.
I bet a lot of people are geeking out over this. I saw the Hasselhoff ad. It was fun.
It was. Also, Rivian has partnered with Uber to provide rides specifically in Rivian vehicles for a week, no doubt in an effort to raise awareness of the brand and the quality of the ride. Unfortunately, it's also had a production plant parking lot fire blaze, damaging 55 vehicles, and worse, headlines of serious bone injuries and a finger amputation at that plant. Ouch. Let's take a moment to acknowledge that's not good.
That's very unfortunate, and best wishes to a speedy recovery to everyone injured. Hard to talk about any positives with news like that.
Indeed, but let us continue anyway, cautiously as we may.
Understood. I will follow your lead. It's just, it
bothers me when in the news I see a story or hear something horrible happened, and the drop of a hat, just like that, they switch topics and they're laughing and this and that. It just comes off so callous.
I understand, and we have techniques to transition topics. I do wish more media would use those techniques because I do agree with you. Switching transitions too quickly or improperly does create this sense of desensitization that we feel when consuming news in that way. And social media is no exception. In fact, it might be traditional news on steroids in that regard. To that end, let us point out doing anything new or relatively new is not easy and can be fraught with danger.
That much is certain.
Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, Jillian's pickup truck.
No doubt about your memory, Mark. Oh man, it's like you're in my head. Was that enough transition time?
I think so. Sometimes it's also good to break the awkward tension, and I hope we get better at this throughout the course of the show.
Okay, so what's going on with the company?
Let's briefly double-click, if you will, to better understand. Taking a step back, Rivian has been around since 2009. It's taking a few years longer to start production than Tesla since founding, but the initial pace of production post-founding is about the same, even though it has 3 models to Tesla's then 1. Important to note, Tesla currently produces almost 2 million vehicles annually to Rivian's roughly 50,000. Rivian went public in the fall of 2021, right as the unprecedented rate hikes decimated inflated company valuations. Since then, Rivian share prices fell more than 10x. It is said about 3 out of 4 Rivian shares are owned by retail investors, and the price is hovering around the $10 mark or thereabouts.
I remember Amazon making that big investment in Rivian. It seemed rich at the time, but the valuation has come down to earth.
It has.
The way you're framing it, it seems there's a path forward for Rivian. So we'll see if their stock price trend will start to reverse and actually gain value if R.J. Scaringe, the Rivian founder and CEO, can grow production over the long haul.
Yes, and that's the key.
Economies of scale.
In terms of large strategic investments, Ford invested just over $1 billion in Rivian a few years back and sold its stake in 2022 for $3 billion. Amazon is said to still own roughly 15% of Rivian, which currently has a market cap of $10 billion. So Amazon is currently about even on its $1 billion Rivian investment,
that makes sense.
Initially to help it offset carbon emissions on its delivery vans. The latest large investment in Rivian may come from Volkswagen to the tune of $5 billion over 3 years.
I think they mentioned a tranche in the quarterly. Well, no shortage of capital investment to scale the company. That's a pretty big investment from Volkswagen and not a bad signal of a positive future for the company. I wonder if Volkswagen is more interested in their EV or SUV IP.
That's a lot of acronyms. To frame it from an OC perspective,
Acronym?
Orange County Business Journal recently noted Rivian's 202.4% growth from 2022 to 2024. Along with 6 other publicly traded OC companies. Virgin Galactic, 216%, Alignment Healthcare, 71%, MB Semiconductor, 65%, Inari Medical, 63%, the Ensign Group, 41%, and Exponential Fitness, 33%. Did I get all those right?
I hope so. By the way, Mark King became the CEO of that last one, I believe, the fitness company, earlier this year.
Mark King. Strong name.
It is.
In other news, Orange County community colleges see 11% enrollment increase, and the UC Irvine Mirage Business School is expected to see growing enrollment in its one-year program. And last but certainly not least, Irvine-based defense company Anduril, founded by OC serial entrepreneur Palmer Luckey of Oculus VR fame, later sold to Facebook, was awarded a $250 million Pentagon contract to supply its Roadrunner interceptor drones and Pulsar electronic warfare systems. Delivery is expected to start this year.
I heard a podcast maybe a couple years ago about how inefficiently defense contracts have traditionally worked. Palmer Luckey was talking about introducing a much more agile and cost-effective approach to defense, which is a very large part of the entire U.S. budget.
Indeed, and government spending efficiency would be highly welcome.
I wouldn't mind seeing a zero-based budgeting approach in the government, but given how much of the U.S. economy is driven by government spending, I heard around 40%, the transition to privatizing many of those parts of the economy would have to be monitored carefully if we don't want unemployment to suddenly skyrocket.
You may get your wish soon.
Sounds foreboding.
Execution would be key.
Uh-huh.
Right, that's not an easy thing to pull off. Well, we can hope for the best, but plan to be ready for a less desirable outcome. Let's put a pin in this. I'd love to get your feedback on saving versus spending at the individual level and its collective impacts. If not today, maybe a future episode. By the way, if anyone is interested in co-hosting or producing these kinds of discussions, please reach out to me. I'm including my contact info in the show notes.
This is definitely a topic of increasing interest for me.
Oh good, you're welcome to join as well. In related and broader state news, California has sought to reduce its state budget deficit in part by setting a $5 million limit on corporate R&D and suspending the net operating loss deduction. That is when a company can apply current losses to future years. The state tax rule changes were adopted in June.
Has it started to work?
July 16th marked the biggest day of collections, going back at least 4 decades. However, California Department of Finance believes it was likely due to large payments by a small number of companies and may not be indicative of coming trends.
So, biggest day of tax collections because of the tax changes?
Well, Apple, Meta, and Google have harvested past losses which they may not be able to use anymore. But also Nvidia has had increasingly large revenue growth fueled by the AI hardware boom from $27 billion in 2022 to $61 billion in 2023, and almost matching 2023 in the first 2 quarters of 2024 alone.
Wow, but wasn't that true for the blockchain boom also?
Somewhat hard to say based on Nvidia's annual revenue. Nvidia's annual revenue went from $4.3 billion to just under $12 billion from 2012 to 2018, and then to just under $27 billion in 2021. So blockchain could have been part of the story at that time. That said, the impact on California tax revenue was possibly a sixth to half in 2021 at best, and by then the current AI wave was likely part of the story. In 2022, Nvidia changed how it reported revenue to 2 segments, graphics and compute and networking. Both grew at the same rate in that year. Before then, they had a data center segment, which more than doubled from 2019 to 2020. Revenue was similar between 2018 and 2019, but also increased by half from 2017 to 2018 and doubled from 2016 to 2017. Those revenue numbers, and therefore California corporate taxes, were much smaller than today. In 2017 to 2018, California only raised a third of the corporate taxes, just over $12 billion at the time.
Okay, you just had that information ready?
I do my research where I can. Numbers are my thing. Also, Nvidia is publicly traded, so this information is freely available to anyone willing to weed through hundreds of pages of disclosures.
Or we can just rewind and listen in slow-mo.
That too.
So do you think corporate revenue makes a bigger difference in California state tax revenue than tax deduction changes?
Again, hard to say. Potentially yes. Here are a few more data points, so bear with me. The California corporate tax rate is almost 9%. Nvidia is tracking to earn almost $100 billion of revenue this year. Nvidia reports their margins on their newsroom website to be in the 75% range. That would put just Nvidia at owing between 6 and 7 billion in corporate taxes. But Nvidia is set to have disclosed effective tax rates between 1.7% and 5.9% between 2020 and 2022. So the real figure could be much smaller, maybe in the billion-dollar range. In 2022 to 2023, the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration report shows California raised more than $37 billion in corporate taxes. CalMatter's analysis of SB 167 estimates the deductions could impact California corporate tax revenue by almost $6 billion.
Yeah, I see your point. Hard to tell. I'd like to think tax revenue is impacted more by actual outcomes rather than accounting practices. But either way, we don't want to incentivize our best companies to leave California. How bad is the California deficit? Didn't we have a surplus not too long ago?
After looking up California tax revenue over 6 years from 2017 to 2023 on the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration site, and then looking at California spending on the California Legislative Analyst's Office over the same time period, I realized a few things.
And what's that?
3 to be precise. 1. I cannot confirm any of the data with what different publications across the internet claim. Many of their figures are just projections, not after-the-fact account reconciliations. Also, I do not know what departments, functions, and agencies are excluded or included, if any, from the calculations. 2. California is in the black by just under $4 billion from 2017 to 2023, excluding any additional federal funds. Looks like the CDTFA did not publish the 2023 to 2024 annual report yet, so I can't comment on that. 3. In terms of tax income, it's trending up from $188 billion to $248 billion in that time period, even from personal income tax, the highest being fiscal years ending 2021 and 2022. 2023 was a $38 billion drop. Corporate tax is also up from $12 billion to $37 billion as mentioned earlier, but dropped from $45 the prior year end, 2022. Other taxes and fees have been steadily up as well. Percentage-wise, personal income tax comprises almost 50% lower in the year ending 2023, and corporate tax has played a larger role from 6.5% in year ending 2018 to 15% in year ending 2023.
That's a lot of information. It's good information. So up to at least a couple years ago, if I hear correctly, California has been doing okay on the whole, though corporations may be feeling increased tax obligations.
Yes, that's not a bad summary of the state over the past few years, not including this past year and upcoming years since the tax data was not available. I did my best to dive into the available primary source of public data. That said, because it has been difficult to confirm this information with other publications, I must disclaim full confidence in these answers. Trying to reconcile various accounts and assumptions about how things are calculated, even though it's elementary school math, at times it does feel like I am hallucinating information.
Yeah, it can make you crazy. I don't know why we make it so difficult for ourselves. This is elementary school math, like you said, and here we are collectively peppering data with spin and forced to conjecture based on incomplete information.
Glad it's not just me seeing this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so short-sighted, to lack easily accessible common data. Not that data does not have a market value for data brokers to sell, but it makes it objectionably harder and more expensive to run organizations that way.
I would say this applies to corporations as well, not just state governments.
So you can probably hear it in my voice, but this has been my pet peeve, especially when I'm trying to build the right product. To have functional organizations, everyone in the org has to understand how they impact it, so all the numbers must at least make sense. When things get too loosey-goosey, people's accountability also falters, and then things just break down.
Sounds like we are both speaking from some personal experiences.
Yep, these rivers run deep.
Let us pivot to California's state regulation of AI. One notable bill was vetoed by the governor, but he also signed a few into law.
Yes, can we go through them? I'd like to better understand how they impact the industry.
Let's do it. California's governor signed a few bills into law on October 2nd and vetoed one, notably, SB 1047, on September 30th. The one he vetoed included proposed safety standards for large AI models. His official reply stated California is home to 32 of the world's 50 leading AI companies, so it's important for California to weigh in especially absent action on a national level. He said although the bill was well-intentioned, it didn't take into account how risky the deployment environment, how critical the decision-making, or how sensitive the data, just that it was a large system where the cost of training it exceeded $100 million before January 1st, 2027. As such, it could both stifle innovation and provide a false sense of security with respect to AI. Thoughts before we move on to what got passed?
Looking at the webpage, it looks like it took more than half a year to get from draft to the governor's desk, and a lot of legal analysis was applied. That's good, but this is also a fast-moving field, so if that timeline is correct, it's a difficult target to hit when it moves fast and the legislation moves comparably slowly.
Although that's true, it does seem like U.S. legislators are more eager to get ahead of AI regulation, more so than on the internet and mobile, which has since demonstrated to not only disrupt journalism by cannibalizing its sales and ad revenue, but also introduce new harms in cyberbullying and social engineering, not to mention concerns of foreign digital media controlling Americans' perceived reality through propaganda.
You're right, and each of those are all very heavy topics.
Yes, too heavy for one small podcast segment.
Okay, so if I may then, I'd like to ask a simpler economic question of who this regulation would affect.
Let's see what we can tease out from a macro level. On the one hand, AI training costs are plummeting. ARK Investment Management looked at what it cost to train an OpenAI GPT-3 level AI in 2020 versus 2022, and the cost dropped 10x from 4.6 million to 450,000.
And that's just 2 years. So you're talking about regulation that took a quarter of that time just to write and reach a governor's desk.
Right, yes, that is a problem. And on the other hand, these models are getting much more complex and sophisticated, and actually much more expensive to train as a result.
So the amount in the bill in theory could make sense from that perspective.
It could, but there's more. Epoch AI is an AI trajectory research nonprofit funded by Open Philanthropy, founded by a Facebook co-founder and their original CTO. That's Dustin Moskovitz. He later went on to found Asana with another engineer from Facebook.
Oh, is that right? That's cool.
Yes, small world in tech.
Speaking of social networks, I'd love to, with perfect information, dive into a rabbit hole of tech history. Who was part of what and how they founded the next thing that triggered the next thing.
Oh yes, I bet that social graph is quite interesting, especially since the friction of that has been somewhat elusive in other geographies.
Yes, having worked with some of them, a lot of economic development orgs around the world would love to be able to duplicate what Silicon Valley has pulled off.
And Epoch is tracking this latest phase. They published a paper in May with some Stanford researchers showing how these AI large language model costs balloon exponentially. From Google's DeepMind AlphaGo in 2017, just under $1 million, to OpenAI's GPT-3 in 2022 at just over $4 million, to Google's Palm in 2022 at over $12 million, to OpenAI's GPT-4 in 2023 at almost $80 million, to Google's Gemini Ultra at almost $200 million in 2023.
Wow, that's quite a trajectory.
And there were less expensive models along the way. For example, Meta's Llama 2 in 2023 was about $4 million. But Epoch plotted the costs over time, and the regression mean slope is a 2.4x per year cost increase.
So you're saying the regulation is eventually going to affect more companies?
Perhaps, but I guess my point is the cost is just one dynamic of needed regulation, and it's not necessarily the most important one, or at least one that's the most equitable if that's anyone's yardstick. Meanwhile, other countries may not self-impose those kinds of regulations.
You're bringing up a good point, and that's a patchwork of regulations just makes for kludgy hoops to jump through and isn't necessarily a deterrent.
Exactly. Let's take a look at what California regulation did pass.
Okay.
Bills signed into law on October 2nd include 6 categories. The first aims to define artificial intelligence on which to build a future body of law and disambiguate it from the definition of an automated decision system. To that end, although progress was made, I believe a lot of ambiguity still exists.
Yeah, I looked at these definitions myself, and I'd have to agree. It is progress to even have a legal definition for AI. However, to say artificial intelligence can quote unquote infer quote unquote outputs from inputs for quote unquote explicit or implicit objectives, using the language of the bill, that quote unquote varies in its level of autonomy, it is just not getting at the core difference between that kind of inference and what an automated decision system derived from machine learning might do. If anything, an automated decision system is just one form of artificial intelligence by these definitions. And that would be right.
Great points. So, back to the drawing board for those?
I think so. Well, we can build on it. I heard this concept of agile lawmaking. We could, in theory, do that here, long as we clean up the quote unquote technical debt of prior kludgy law. We don't want to create a moving target for companies either, but we have to balance progress with safety. Okay, so now you're going to get me philosophizing a bit, but moving forward, I think we have to ask the tough question of how the intelligence is artificial. I think we're in the language now in the bill, we're just dancing around the topic. Is it the organic versus inorganic platform on which the hardware operates, neurons versus chips, or that hardware and software is inextricably intertwined in neurons but not in chips? That delineation may bite us in a few decades when the Turing test truly fails and sentience is considered, along with the rights that may bestow. But I know that we're not there now, and I'm getting ahead of myself.
I was just going to say, but the futurist point stands.
Right. Just to push this point a little further, I mean, we are in the realm of science fiction with current LLMs as it stands, so it does capture the imagination, does it not?
It does. You are not wrong there.
So, is it the level of sophistication which separates artificial from mere automation, or more fundamentally from natural intelligence? That's a tricky proposition, but could be a useful exercise to go through. What sets of capabilities are merely automated, whereas others are intelligence? This may become a tangent, but also what is superintelligence? I think we can say we are close enough to that level of processing given how large these models are getting.
Conceivably.
I'm going to run a little farther with this and say maybe it's both the platform and the level of sophistication. That has obvious humanist qualities, good and bad. Initially, most of us would say good, but as the lines blur between the two, we'd have a harder time with that characterization and may someday have to atone for our words.
Looks like we are going out on this limb. But I suppose that's where long-form podcasts shine.
I know it's a little out there based on where we are in time, to Andrew Ng's point. But it's worth confronting our collective presumptions. So, practically speaking, confronting these questions head on with AI could allow us to get at the deeper truth about the differences between artificial and natural intelligence. So we can, have legal definitions that won't eat up our already limited legal bandwidth.
That approach may be more practical than on first glance. By the way, for the listeners, Andrew Ng is a former Baidu chief scientist who compared worrying about superintelligent AI to worrying about overpopulation on Mars. And Baidu is basically China's Google.
And let's not forget, OpenAI's explicit goal is to create artificial general intelligence, AGI. And the state of the art in AI is decades farther along than Mars colonization.
True. Do you think the audience will stick with us through this segment as we geek out over our admittedly shared neuro and cognitive science background?
Sure. Why not? I'd like to think we're easy to listen to while, people jog, cook, do housework, or whatever.
And we can always see where they drop off in the podcast statistics.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
Ha!
But just to close out the point about types of intelligence, or even sentience, we consider ourselves the only sentient beings in the known universe. But we may have to expand that definition in the future when talking about AI. Maybe we can define types of sentience, not in the sense of which is better, but more in the sense of who we are as humans, qualitatively, how we govern ourselves and who we consider citizen candidates at any given time. In the future, we may discover a new type of sentience, and we may want to describe it and figure whether, how, and where it can fit in our fabric of society. I mean, right now we're looking to figure out how just this level of AI fits in, our everyday lives and how it challenges or improves our condition.
Strangely, we have the concept of corporate personhood protected under U.S. law and things like Citizen United.
Oh, that's right. Wow. Mind blown. Well, there you go. Potential foundation for AI citizens. Here come the men on a silicone stack.
You were a Men in Black and Star Trek fan growing up, weren't you?
Were, my guy. I went as an MIB agent for Halloween this year. Most people thought I was a spy or bridegroom, though.
We straight don't exist. No names and no fingerprints.
They won't let you remember. Oh, man. By the way, did you see the California bill passed about protecting consumers' neural data?
Yes, good tangent.
Yeah, SB 1223, approved on September 28th. I think this will become a vital piece of legislation when it comes to protecting the core being of a person in a technologically advanced world where fingerprints, faces, retinal scans, and DNA all just kind of float out there in the interwebs. Unless you're on MIB, that is.
Naturally.
That aside, it's good to see privacy can still be protected in a world like that.
It is.
Okay. In closing, on the vetoed bill and my second point about the level of AI sophistication as a defining characteristic between artificial intelligence and automated decision systems, if the latter, the decision systems, are defined by creating simplified output, quote unquote, I would say that is woefully inadequate. I'd argue the most brilliant thinking results in elegantly simple output. Examples. Zeiss makes small things look big. Airbnb lets you rent someone's home anywhere.
Yeah.
Google organizes the world's information.
Mm-hmm.
Pantheism says we are one. Christianity says Jesus will save you. Right? I mean, all these are profound statements, but very simply stated.
Those are elegantly simple yet profound set of statements. And I mean that both playfully and sincerely.
I'll take it. What are the other pieces of legislation?
We're just over an hour, so we'll go quickly. 10 Assembly or Senate bills across 5 categories provide various protections.
Hit me.
The 5 categories are 1. Including AI literacy in California's K-12 curriculum. That's AB 2876. Incidentally, that could hasten the educators to come up to speed on it as well. 2. Mandating robocalls disclose the use of AI-generated voices. AB 2905. 3. Criminalizing involvement in creation or disclosure of underage or non-consensual AI-generated explicit content and mandating social media reporting mechanisms. AB 1831, SB 926, and SB 981. 4. Prohibition of knowingly distributing and mandatory labeling or blocking of deceptive AI-generated political content before and after an election by creators and distributors. AB 2655, AB 2039, and AB 2355. The language is more accurate in the legislature, but this is essentially an attempt to curb deepfakes in elections. And 5, requiring consent for AI-generated replicas of someone's likenesses or voices at risk of monetary penalties within 70 years of the person's death. AB 2602 and AB 1836. Thoughts?
Good laws. No notes.
Really? I thought you'd have more to say.
Well, these are fairly common sense protections. Only points I would bring up is around navigability and enforceability of the laws. They seem clear-cut and fair, but hopefully it doesn't create yet another patchwork of laws to navigate across the U.S. and the world. Also, I hope good faith efforts to follow laws in the case of things like personality likenesses will not be met with unnecessary legislation, which can result in creative cooling.
Like with anything, it probably will be a patchwork until federal or international laws eventually override. They will hopefully converge on similar best practices as previous IP and human rights laws have in the past, at least in freer developed nations.
Yeah.
But on your second point, exemptions for purposes of comment, criticism, scholarship, satire, or parody hold.
That makes sense, but also will make for some realistic parody. Meaning, given how the human brain works, I expect too many people will believe these things. Reposts will not include the disclaimers, etc., etc.
Unfortunately so. It's worth reviewing the state of AI regulations across the world to get a directional sense of approaches across regions.
Yes, let's do that. And that gives me a chance to rest my voice a bit.
Okay. Given the new-ish incoming administration in the US, it is expected to be less restrictive than previous, but that remains to be seen. Canada proposed the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, focusing on risk management, transparency, and public safety, but likely won't be voted on before the next election. Mexico has not developed comprehensive AI regulation, but proposals address deepfakes and risk management. While other Western Hemisphere nations also have not yet acted, Brazil notably has proposed Bill number 2-338/2023, addressing risk as a key point. In other parts of the world, the EU enacted the AI Act focusing on risk. China has also released their AI safety governance framework in September, with safety risk as a major component. Australian guidelines focus on safe AI development. The UK notably is taking a pro-innovation stance, something they may share with the incoming US administration.
Wow, great summary, very succinct.
Thank you.
So, we're back to the problem of balancing innovation versus safety. It does seem like a good chunk of the world is falling into the safety camp, at least with respect to commercially available technology. We won't necessarily know what their governments do behind closed doors.
Would we, though?
No, I guess not, but maybe it would encourage some kind of transparency and a push towards, being out in the open.
Maybe. I don't know if that's just wishful thinking, though. On the one hand, all the safety posturing by other governments may be the counter-argument to AI innovators in Silicon Valley who fear if not here, then it will inevitably happen abroad. On the other hand, the growing distrust of government in US tech circles combined with the belief foreign governments will push the envelope anyway may be enough to continue pushing the innovators at an accelerated pace. In your earlier example of Google generating a quarter of its code by AI, human reviewers still approve the code before shipping. It remains to be seen whether this will lead to more or fewer bugs. If anyone in the industry knows the answer to this question, please let us know. And with that, another message from our sponsor.
Pickup Club. Pick up something great.
We are back. Let's do a quick, non-comprehensive segment of national and international news. We are going to break the fourth wall here a little and just admit the production of this very first episode has taken a while, so providing up-to-the-minute news at this time is aspirational.
To be fair, our podcast is called Double Click, not Double Quick.
But how long have you been holding on to that one?
I mean...
It's like we share a brain.
I can gently tap the fourth wall too. Talk data to me.
You think that's what I do?
I mean...
Also, that was not a supporting wall, was it?
Purely cosmetic.
Fair enough. U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy somewhat recently issued an advisory on the mental health and well-being of parents, citing things like worrying about health, safety, finances, and new challenges like navigating technology, social media, youth mental health crisis, and an epidemic of loneliness. He said, quote, "As a father of 2 kids, I feel these pressures too," end quote.
I could have told you that.
You and me both, friend.
Loneliness. Well, at least we have each other.
On that note, if anyone else wants to be a part of this podcast, please hit us up.
Ouch.
The more the merrier, right?
Yeah,
Oh, stop it. I know you would really like the added dynamic.
I would. But then we couldn't do the shtick.
We could still bring it out as the situation calls for it.
You know what? You're right.
I know.
By the way, is this weird?
I mean, it's not much different from a writer writing characters for different people to play.
But we're doing it all.
A one-man play.
Yes, you are clearly carrying this production.
Okay, let's push forward. The stock market has been on a tear since June of 2022, with the S&P 500 index going from 3,585 to over 5,900 as of the middle of November 2024. That's a 65% growth over 29 months, an incredible run rate of return. For comparison, the S&P 500 from its inception to end of 2023 is just under 10%.
Time for a correction?
Not if the new administration has anything to say about it.
Just goes to demonstrate the power of the 500 leading publicly traded U.S. companies.
Coupled with investor desire to ride the new hot thing, AI in this case.
Has the demand for alpha return on investment ever been higher?
The CNN and Wall Street Bets Fear and Greed indices say we are in the greed territory right now. High, but not at a historical high.
Seems the recent earnings reports have been fairly positive, but investors just want more. Take Nvidia. Released earnings end of November, beat on both top and bottom lines, with sales increasing 94% year over year to $35 billion.
That sounds great. How did the stock do?
It fluctuated with volatility. Can you believe that?
We could do a deep dive analysis, but maybe that's the right bellwether for this moment.
Do you think the S&P 500 in aggregate is still the best investment on a risk-adjusted basis?
Warren Buffett certainly thought so.
Sure, but moving forward in today's environment.
Yes, if your time horizon is 5+ years for a return on investment. For the listeners, in 2008, Warren Buffett bet Protege Partners, LLC, that hedge funds can't beat the S&P 500 over time. And he won.
It was $1 million bet or something like that?
Yes, over the time horizon of the bet, Buffett certainly won. And the bet winnings were reported to be donated to Girls Incorporated of Omaha.
Man, what an American treasure, by many metrics.
Certainly seems like a stand-up guy. Who says nice guys finish last?
A lot of people apparently, but he did it anyway and won.
Furthermore, he noted the financial elites wasted $100 billion or more over the previous decade by investing with high-fee hedge funds instead of low-fee index funds. But even worse, state pension plans who invested with hedge funds lost out on returns equivalent to the hedge fund fees.
That's a real shame. They tried to play the rich man's game and got burned anyway.
Maybe there's something else going on with hedge funds, but now we know the better market play is low-cost index funds. Let's do some tech news. The Department of Justice has been looking to break up Google. A federal judge ruled in August that Google held an illegal monopoly in search and text advertising. This is a violation of Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. On November 20th, 2024, in case you are listening to this farther into the future, the DOJ called for Google to divest its Chrome browser. Google's stock price has decreased around 5% in the day or two after the DOJ filing. Earlier speculations included the breakup of YouTube, but this has not yet come to pass as of this recording.
Oof. 5% of $2 trillion is a cool $100 billion.
Ouch indeed, but that may be the lesser of their worries.
Interestingly, Microsoft in the 2000s got tripped up for basically the same reason. For anyone old enough to remember, Microsoft started bundling Internet Explorer browser with the Windows operating system. It was to protect against an existential threat.
The threat being...
Microsoft was afraid their operating system would lose market power to the Internet browser with the rise of the Internet.
Yes, meaning the browser would become more important in customers' decisions to discover, use, or pay for software, or increasingly other products and services, than the operating system.
Yes, and Microsoft took it very seriously. Bundling IE in large part led to the downfall of Netscape. Ironically, that's what later gave rise to a sort of second act, Firefox, and then Google's Chrome. Acquired did a 2-part, 9-hour podcast special on the history of Microsoft where the hosts covered this in some detail.
9 hours, huh?
Yeah, it's a commitment. I listened to it in bite-sized portions, but I do recommend it.
I will add it to my queue.
Google may be in a similar dilemma because Chrome arguably protects Google's search business by defaulting to Google Search. And the double whammy is potentially losing search share to AI. You could also argue they have been losing share all along with Amazon growing e commerce search and people spending more time directly on social media and other proprietary platforms, searching directly on those platforms instead. This is what Google has been arguing all along, and it remains to be seen whether Google will actually divest Chrome. Microsoft ended up not getting broken up 20 years earlier, but the antitrust litigation did have quite the cooling effect on their mergers and acquisitions and on their consumer business. Eventually, Microsoft figured out how to market and sell to enterprises, which brought them roaring back post Bill Gates, starting with Steve Ballmer and later with Satya Nadella as CEO. But at the time, it definitely got dicey.
Good summary. Would I still have to listen to all 9 hours of the Acquired series?
Oh, this is just scratching the surface. I mentioned as I got older, I started appreciating history a lot more. The history of tech and business and why certain decisions were made, in retrospect, make a lot more sense. They also inform my own business decisions.
It is fascinating how organizations continue to evolve, buy business units, sell business units, change their names to better reflect their current business compositions.
Would that mean they're evolving or developing?
Depends on whether you consider the org the individual or each worker the individual.
That's a good point. Citizens unite!
Steve Ballmer was the unsung hero of their enterprise business.
Oh, he's doing fine.
That he is.
I mean, he owns 3 times as many Microsoft shares as Bill Gates, for crying out loud.
Is that right?
And the Los Angeles Clippers.
Right. We are not sad for him.
Not at all. Question. What would you say the market thinks of these kinds of breakups in general?
While executives don't like it because it shrinks their arguably inflated compensation based on market cap, some schools of thought say shareholders win with corporate breakups because often the market capital sum of parts is greater than the conglomerate. Potentially because investors can more accurately appraise their values on things like earnings multiples, etc., compared to competitors.
What about strategic synergies, for lack of a better word?
That's a somewhat intangible thing. Certainly, Google has enjoyed the ability to make large bets across many markets with the combined profits of all their business units, with search and YouTube comprising a large part of it, over 50% and around 10% respectively, though cloud has been growing as well, approaching 13% of total revenue in Q3 of 2024.
So you're saying there are pros and cons to a breakup?
Indeed, in life, just as in love, and sometimes one side has more to gain or lose. It can be complicated. Sometimes corporations have more leverage than governments, and sometimes it is the other way around. For example, it is a well-known phenomenon that the rise of Google and Meta has dried up newspaper budgets around the world by taking away their advertising revenue and providing free news, often based on those same newspapers. In recent months, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand proposed laws to force tech companies to share revenue generated from articles displayed on their platforms. In the case of Google, it has said it would stop linking to news content in those countries.
Savage. Who has more leverage and who will blink first?
That's right. Here's another one with a twist. The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to hear a lawsuit Mexico filed against Smith & Wesson and 6 other major gun makers for flooding their country with weapons. Mexico is seeking damages of $10 billion.
That is a twist. We usually hear rhetoric about the U.S.-Mexico border being leaky in the north direction, drugs, etc. But here, Mexico is saying it has problems with guns pouring south from the U.S. This has a potential to be quite the spectacle.
It does. In the data privacy legal realm, an Austrian citizen sued Meta for using data Meta allegedly acquired elsewhere about his sexual orientation to target tailored ads to him on the Meta platform. Meta has been collecting data on users for decades now, said the plaintiff's attorney, but the EU law requires data minimization.
This one's tough because small and large businesses rely on targeted advertising to sell goods and services. This theoretically keeps costs lower so that more businesses are viable, growing the global economies. That said, it can be creepy to start seeing ads for things that are either not disclosed publicly or compartmentalized for different reasons like safety or even personal livelihood.
Another case of pros and cons?
Perhaps technology is certainly challenging our values and way of life.
Yes. But isn't it beautiful when the private and public sectors work together against bad actors?
Yes, it is. We really need a bright spot to end on.
A hacking group known as Star Blizzard, tied to Russian
Oh,
intelligence,
geez.
tried to hack into dozens of Western think tanks, journalists, and former military and intelligence officials with targeted social engineering tactics known as spear phishing. These can be pretty sophisticated and tougher to spot because they are tailor made and not just cast out with a wide net with bad spelling written by amateurs. Luckily, Microsoft and the US government intervened and seized more than 100 website domains.
That's a start, but it seems like catching hackers is so whack-a-mole.
It is reported Microsoft has been tracking their activities since 2017.
Case in point, I'm still surprised our emails are as open to hacking attempts as they are. Spam filters are much better than they used to be, but we should be able to report these emails directly to the DOJ with the click of a button. This could be solved with timely crowdsourced data.
Which I'm sure it is.
It is, but it just feels like nothing's being done. I mean, this group has been tracked since 2017. They should have been booked that same year. You know, all the emails, all the spam emails that I get. I mean, are those helping the DOJ capture them? I feel like all our data collectively uh, could help, and yet I don't think it's being used at all.
A common reply is that the sheer volume just overwhelms the organizations and systems.
And so that's interesting because that means that there aren't enough resources being put into protection, but lots of them being put into scams. So scams pay a lot, but protection doesn't pay a lot. Um, there's probably some asymmetry in that case in the incentive structure, which sounds like maybe there needs to be an insurance vehicle of some sort, right? Because that's what insurance does. It sort of spreads out the risk across a wider population.
That's an interesting take, or yet another thing AI could help to solve. I hope.
Do you have another one to end on? The previous one was kind of a buzzkill.
Aw, okay. I have another quick one that may be better. As you may know, the dock workers union suspended the strike until January 15th to give time to negotiate a new contract. This minimized any October surprises in the presidential election year and probably helps with a relatively smooth Christmas gifting season. Also, Amazon is looking to deliver packages even faster by projecting visual and auditory cues to the driver to select the correct package when arriving at any given address.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, that is brighter. Good last mile news.
Now for more pet peeves.
No, I thought we were ending on good news.
Right, sorry, we still may.
Well, I gave you one earlier, but actually I do have one.
I thought you might.
Be that as it may, I would love for us to collectively agree to use the term red pill to only mean choosing the hard path, the inconvenient truth. Like, when did it become a political term, you know?
Oh, I know what you mean. Neo is rolling over in his fictitious grave. Have you seen the latest Matrix? I think it's called Resurrections.
Yeah, he comes back.
Neo comes back?
Yeah.
Whoa, right, the title. Is it good?
I liked it, yeah. Moves the story along.
I'll have to catch that one. The original is a classic.
It is. Can you imagine living in a synthetic world like that and not even knowing it?
Well, funny you should say that. Maybe we have time for one last quick topic you may be into. As AI giants run out of human-generated data on which to train their ever-growing models, they are turning to synthetic data. That is data the AI models themselves generate.
I think I see where you're going with this, but synthetic data
Kind of makes me think of the statistical methodology of bootstrapping, where you generate data randomly based on a smaller sample of data.
Does it? It is a related concept.
Wouldn't that kind of approach just generate data on cruise control? It wouldn't move the conversation forward in a meaningful way. It doesn't capture changing public sentiment. It doesn't move humanity forward. It's fabricated data telling fabricated stories. Every time I read a soulless article on the web, I think AI wrote it.
Your instincts are probably correct. A lot of sites just use the stories for mass-producing SEO targets so they can sell ads.
In a way, I respect the hustle, but I can't help but feel we lose a little humanity with each piece of content like that. The economic incentives are all deranged in that use case.
No argument there.
It has also occurred to me that flooding the zone with mass propaganda generated by that methodology could also start to sway public opinion.
Not unlike what is happening already with domestic and foreign-owned social media.
Yeah, sometimes you see these slow-moving icebergs coming and you think you're crazy for noticing it, but when everyone around you is just business as usual, but it's definitely happening. Like I read, 44% of California renters and 22% of California homeowners are quote-unquote not satisfied with their finances. I mean, when real estate goes up 7% a year, it's hard to expect that won't become unsustainable. I noticed that right away when I first started renting over 20 years ago.
Never a dull moment in this brave new world, is it?
We certainly live in interesting times. By the way, we didn't really talk about product techniques and best practices.
There's always next time.
Okie doke.
Well, this has been quite a conversation. I very much enjoyed it, and I hope the listeners have as well.
Thank you so much for having me on. I had a lot of fun, and we covered some heavy topics.
We did, and the pleasure was all mine. I hope you can join me for another conversation in the future.
I would like that.
Any last words before we close?
Well, do you mind if we close with a song?
Is this one of your songs or just one you're thinking of?
One of mine.
I think we can do that. Any sensitive subjects or politics we need to warn the audience about?
Well, I may push the envelope a little bit, but no curse words. It's nuanced and lyrical. Hope you like it.
And with that, we have
Young Axel Hart.
Young Axel Hart with
BattleBot.
We close out our very first episode with Young Axel Hart, BattleBot.
Don't do it, Axe.
Don't get me going, wop bops, sharp as a tax. Let me out my 2 cents. They're glorifying poles instead of poles. Take it from a pole, take a pole dance. Get down to brass tacks, to and from. Taxi, I see a wrong, correct the mundo. Apparently I hop, skip, and jump barely. Carrying arms, getting charged, and the leg up sound way cooler. Saying these boring things than they ever sounded about murdering a beat. I kid you not, will be more carnage than a minor bit. I bet on the farm, only I might be militant. I'm arming to the teeth in syllables and billables of silly bills. The ball with a ball, if you will, I'm betting the farm on a flow pretty as Betty, or better yet, 50 snipers though even more deadly.
BattleBot, now I'm on the attack. Wish me luck, I've had more than a rabbit foot, but I never needed more than I do now. Put on the facade, armor because I'm not done. BattleBot, now I'm on the attack. Wish me luck, I've had more than a rabbit foot, but I never needed more than I do now. Put on the facade, armor because I'm not done.
Missed the last appointment, so annoying, but I dodged a bullet, must mean I'm anointed. The hash tag doesn't do it justice. Maybe I'm luckier than good is a good point. Must admit I missed a disappointment though. Thought I'd be along farther in this moment. I wouldn't trade becoming a father at any point, but if I could have built my empire ahead of time, I'm sprinting the 5K now. My legs are fine and I'm running out of breath too. Nothing's forever, man. If I don't drop dead right here, right on this track, cardio be ridiculous, I can promise that.
BattleBot, now I'm on the attack. Wish me luck, I've had more than a rabbit foot, but I never needed more than I do now. Put on the facade, armor because I'm not done. BattleBot, now I'm on the attack. Wish me luck, I've had more than a rabbit foot, but I never needed more than I do now. Put on the facade, armor because I'm not done.
I do it like decimating these decibel, desecrating these desperate, those emanating like I'm and I'm firefighting and flaming. I'm finding fun and creative ways, alphabetic, illiterate, automatic, obliterate. Let me say it more sailorly, simplifying a sail beat. I can see you debating whether I have what it takes. Not about to say it quits with the heart to get where I say. Hope you're starting to see